Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israel defending its decision to close the offices of some 6 Palestinian NGOs with ties to terror. Meantime, German police opening an official investigation into Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. And finally, for the first time in the history of the Mossad intelligence agency, 4 women have been appointed to some of the organization's senior-most positions. Responding to the United States this week, Israel agreeing to provide extra evidence to justify its closure of several Palestinian NGOs' offices over the weekend. In a series of operations Thursday morning, Israeli Defense Forces shuttering the West Bank offices of some 6 Palestinian NGOs with links to terror groups. The NGOs added to Israel's terror group registry in October 2021. And now footage and photos on social media showing the IDF confiscating certain items from their offices before welding their entrances shut with iron plates. The move raising eyebrows, though, as many world powers still not yet convinced of these groups' terror ties. And in fact, the EU, the UN, and the US all suggesting that they'll continue to work with the groups in question until Israel provides better proof.
We have reached out to the Israeli government including at senior levels, including here from Washington, as well as from our embassy in Jerusalem, for more information regarding the basis for these closures. We, of course, have assured them that we will review that information on a timely basis and very carefully as well.
Israel, meantime, vowing to provide the evidence requested, but many links between the NGOs and terror groups like the PFLP have already been established and published by the Israeli government and organizations like NGO Monitor. And now with more on the IDF's closures of Palestinian NGOs in the West Bank, Vice President of NGO Monitor, Olga Deutsch. Olga, thank you so much for joining me. Now, what can you tell us about these organizations? How can you be certain of their connections to terror, for example?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an important additional development in this rolling and ongoing episode. What we are actually talking about is not just a few terror-affiliated NGOs. We're talking about an NGO arm or NGO network of a Palestinian terror organization, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP. It is a designated terror group by Israel, clearly, but also by the US, the EU, and Canada. What they have done is a very smart move. They operate as a political party. They clearly have an armed arm, right, a terror group, but they also created an NGO network. They have 13 NGOs affiliated to their group that raise money from EU and other European governments, predominantly because the European countries have a tradition of supporting civil society. But the funds, the money is only a secondary issue here. A much bigger problem is actually the legitimacy that is being granted to these groups through the funding and the support, because they are being labeled as human rights and humanitarian groups, as opposed to what they really are in practice, and that is promoters of terror group agenda at best and terror proxies at worst, as we have seen in the case of late Rina Schnurb, whose anniversary of murder is coming up in a few days. I would like to remind your viewers that 3 years ago, Rina Schnurb was brutally murdered in a terror attack that took place next to Jerusalem, and a terror cell counting 50 people that affiliated to PFLP had at least 5 people who served as senior officials of some of these NGOs.
So how much of the information collected by Israel and NGO Monitor has actually been transferred to the UN, the EU, and the United States? And why don't they believe the evidence?
The debate that we are seeing between the Israeli government and the European and US officials is a political one. It is a politicization, if you'd like, of a security issue. NGO Monitor, an independent research organization that I represent, has been collecting for over a decade now open source, so publicly available information, and in colloquial language, that just means anyone can Google it. That shows that more than 60 officials that work or serve on the boards of these 13 NGOs have direct links to the terror group PFLP, meaning that any one government, if it liked to do so, could have checked and verified the information. Now, it is important to say another thing. The development, the recent development that we are discussing today is not a new one. The Ministry of Defense merely ratified a decision that was made more than a year ago.
Well, then, regardless of the proof, the EU, the UN, the US, they're saying that they'll continue to operate with the closed NGOs in question until they're convinced to do otherwise. So what did closing the offices actually accomplish in the short term?
Well, those are two separate issues. The designation by the Israeli government is a security move, and it provides the Israeli government legal tools to take action against these groups, including raiding their offices, shutting down their bank accounts, etc. The decision to fund or not fund these groups through various development and cooperation programs by the EU and other European governments is a political decision that the European governments should make on their own. It is important to mention that since the designation and since the murder of Rina Schnurb and the announcement that of the involvement of the NGOs in the terror attack, the European governments themselves have taken serious steps. 4 governments have launched official investigations, and 3 have stopped their funding. The Dutch government actually canceled their contract with one of these groups after an independent investigation found enough publicly available evidence that this group was clearly connected to PFLP, and the EU froze its funding pending final resolution of the issue. The German Ministry of Foreign Affairs earlier this year, in a joint press conference with back then our foreign minister, Yair Lapid, announced that Germany will continue to fund organizations in the PA without engaging with these 6 groups. So there's the European discussion is actually a discussion and a disagreement between the elected officials in different European parliaments and the administration. The parliaments of the European governments are clearly saying when there is open source, publicly available information of merely an affiliation between these NGOs and a terror group, that should be enough of a reason for us not to engage with them. I mean, a common sense would assume that even a linkage to a terror group should disqualify a group from being a partner in a human rights or a humanitarian program. But the administration of these governments insists on continuing to working with them because they have been doing so for over a decade. And I assume it would be an embarrassment for these ministries to admit that they should have known better.
All right, Olga, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the Jewish Agency of Moscow is getting a stay of execution, so to speak, as the hearing on its closure is now postponed for 30 days. The Defense Council given until September 19 to review new documents. Russia's Basmani court agreeing on Friday to suspend its verdict in the state's case against the Jewish Agency's branch in Moscow. Russia's Justice Ministry is looking to liquidate the branch over alleged breaches of Russian privacy laws. But the Jewish Agency, or Sokhnut, is denying any wrongdoing, and both Israeli authorities as well as Defense Council are hoping to prove innocence before the new court date, September 19.
Рассчитываем на то, что в итоге организация продолжит работу в России.
The Jewish Agency is a nonprofit NGO that promotes local Jewish community life as well as immigration to Israel, and many Israeli officials suggesting that actually Russia may be trying to close the Jewish Agency in retaliation over Jerusalem's support for Ukraine against Russia's invasion. particularly as the Jewish agencies helping Russian Jews who are critical of Russia's invasion, like oncologist Ilya Fomintsev, immigrate to Israel and escape persecution.
24 февраля я вышел на площадь, просто вышел на площадь, я ничего не делал. И намеревался высказаться по поводу войны. Я не хотел, чтобы она была. Я протестовал против нее, но попротестовать я, собственно говоря, и не успел. Я был схвачен и помещен в тюрьму. Ну, как тюрьма. Это не совсем тюрьма, это такая лайт-версия тюрьмы. Это называется спецприемник.
Fomintsev spent 20 days in prison, and 2 months after his release, he registered with the Jewish agency to make Aliyah, finally arriving in Israel in August.